Welcome to Daily News Egypt Oumnia.
Hi Mohamed, thank you for having me today.
It's a pleasure meeting you, Oumnia. We would like to get to know your insights about the Egyptian economy.
So Oxford Business Group has been in Egypt for 15 years now, conducting this kind of intensive research. And over the past few years, we've seen Egypt undertake a very comprehensive economic reform program, which has included monetary and fiscal reforms geared towards strengthening public finances, shoring up international reserves, encouraging private sector growth, and building investor confidence. As part of this reform program, we have seen, among many other steps, subsidies reforms and the introduction of VAT, aimed at balancing the budget, as well as legal and regulatory reforms, like the new investment law and the new microfinance law. Regulations in banking, for example, have been rolled out and they require commercial banks to allocate 20% of their portfolios to SMEs by 2020. So all this suggests significant progress is being made on the regulatory front and that the implementation of these reforms is well underway. Nevertheless, despite the improved macroeconomic picture, there is still progress to be made on a number of fronts. For example, the structural reforms, unemployment, closing the housing gap, and also financial inclusion. We're now working on our 2019 research, so we'll be following the economy very closely on these reforms.
Okay. In your point of view, what is the required GDP growth needed to create enough jobs and achieve the aspirations of the Egyptian people?
GDP growth is one of several indicators of a country's economic growth. According to this metric, Egypt has one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, and the rate of economic growth is expected to increase as the country continues to reap the benefits of its ongoing reforms. Actually, according to the IMF, GDP growth is forecast to reach 5.2% this year and 5.5% in 2019, up from 4.3% last year. And as you mentioned, it has been highlighted by the IMF as well as President El-Sisi recently, that one of the biggest challenges facing Egypt is the rate of population growth, which is approximately 2.4% per year. With a population today of around 97 million people, this creates a huge demand for housing and jobs. Recently, at the 5th Youth Conference, President El-Sisi said that GDP growth of 7.5% would be necessary to lift living standards in line with population growth. A focus on education and financial inclusion will help the impact of these reforms and the accompanying economic growth to be felt by the population more broadly.
That's perfect, thank you. Can you tell me about the Egyptian aspiration to become a regional energy hub? How would the geopolitical risks, like the tensions between Cyprus and Turkey, affect such goals?
When it comes to Egypt's aspiration to become a regional focal point for hydrocarbon trade and power generation, many factors come into play. The first one would be the geographical location, which is an obvious starting point. Egypt being situated between Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa and the GCC, with a solid infrastructure that can accommodate local production as well as additional capacity, makes Egypt a natural energy hub. Moreover, the energy sector in Egypt is one where we have seen so many reforms being implemented, and there are a number of projects to expand power generation capabilities and refining capacity at the same time that the new discoveries and increasing production are helping to reduce Egypt's own imports. Recently, there was an MOU signed with Europe and there are plans to share electricity with Saudi Arabia and Sudan, which clearly indicates that Egypt is becoming an important player in the regional energy front.
What about tourism? Can Egypt recover its tourism sector and return to the pre-2011 levels?
That's a very interesting question. Tourism's contribution to the GDP in 2007 was almost 20%. In comparison, in 2016, tourism's direct contribution to the GDP was 3.2%. Although the indirect effects of the industry increased the total contribution to 7.2% of the GDP, expanding by 3.9% in 2017, the sector contributed to the upward revision of overall economic growth expectations for the country. Moving forward, the industry should receive a boost from the resumption of direct flights to and from Russia, which is one of the country's largest sources of international visitors. The tourism sector should also benefit from the diversification of source markets for tourists to Egypt and enhanced security. I believe that Egypt has all the necessary tourist attractions, whether beaches or historical sites, and it has the infrastructure to accommodate those numbers. So for me, the focus for the sector right now should be on promoting Egypt as an attractive tourist destination.
Okay. What about the education challenge? How can the private sector play a role in resolving the skill gap between the graduates and the job needs?
Education is a sector where the challenges and the opportunities are closely tied to the population growth. As the population grows, so does the burden on government to provide services, and ensuring accessibility as demand increases is perhaps the top priority, because education that the population receives now will have an impact on economic growth across the board in the medium to long run. The private sector can be very effective in tackling challenges in areas like these, where a rising demand for services or capacity requires a rapid response. However, it is equally important for there to be an efficient regulatory environment that enables investments in order for the private sector to be effective. For example, if you're building schools or clinics, the access and the affordability of the prices or the land for building these schools is a very important factor for the investors, and also allowing for creativity and freedom to come up with unique solutions should be balanced with ensuring that the care of education offered meets a certain standard. And also the technology is evolving so fast that it should also provide an additional solution in both of these sectors, which are education and health, and increase accessibility to quality services.
In your opinion, what are the main challenges that faces the private sector in Egypt?
The challenges are very different from one sector to the other. For example, the cost of imports remains a challenge for sectors that rely on imported materials, and the price and availability of land affects a number of sectors. While regulations and bureaucratic efficiency are improving, this is an area where business would like to see continued progress. Nevertheless, there is greater clarity regarding the economic outlook and increased confidence in the economic growth from last year, which has been driving interests for investment opportunities.
Thank you, Oumnia, for being here today and sharing your valuable insights with Daily News Egypt.
Thank you, Daily News, for having me today. It was a pleasure.